Winter Roses, Summer by fairytalelovr. Chapter 35. Past Swords. The ceremony at the Sept of Baelor was to be followed by a grand wedding breakfast, as befit the honour of the office Ned Stark held. Adam was enjoying it, having been away from court all these years, but he was certainly not enjoying the abhorrent lack of security and the altogether mess of the thing. Maybe he was just too used to Aerys's paranoia, but Robert Baratheon only had one Kingsguard with him, none covering his son and heir, and he was drinking from the goblets he found on his way, not one single taster in sight. If anyone wanted to poison the king, this would be an easy opportunity, though the man would more likely to keel over due to the amount of wine he ingested, not from anything extra put in it. "I knew better than to ask your sister, but man, I am glad to see you." Adam laughed and turned around, his keen senses automatically checking for listeners. "I missed you too, Oberyn." "You are a lot harder to kill than that. I always knew it. Her story was even more especially stupid. Their White Tower isn't even their highest, though there is a lovely, very nice concealed entrance to a cove where a boat could conveniently be waiting. You should stop sneaking around other people's castles, you know. You've been telling me this since we were what? 7? 5. Adam rolled his eyes. And I'm still ignoring you. So, where have you been? In the middle of nowhere. You wouldn't run and hide, the prince started, earning a glare. Adam, my sister decided. Well, if there is one lesson I learned, it's that we should listen to our sisters. The knight laughed heartily. We damn well should, my friend. Anyway, you weren't running and hiding, Adam. I know you. What were you waiting for? Revenge? No. Justice. I know a bit about that, the prince replied, with a dangerous gleam in his eyes. I'm sure you've heard that your nephew gave me something to laugh over in that regard. You certainly have enough reasons to be proud. Adam had to force himself not to frown. The casualness with which Oberyn had spoken implied that the man was firm in his belief. But he couldn't remember anything Edric could have... Oh. Right. Ella had said she hadn't corrected Oberyn's assumption that Jon was her son. My sister told me. Not that it hasn't come up since I arrived in the city. And we've sparred. Jon Starling truly is his father's son, a skilled swordsman and a noble knight. His mother's blood, as far as I know, Oberyn said with a shrug. Yes, his mother's blood does have a great influence in his skill, he said with a nostalgic smile, remembering a fierce little she-wolf who wouldn't give up. Adam thought it was time to change the subject, though. It was not the time for Oberyn to know the truth, and explaining in detail what had happened all those years ago was not an endeavour to be undertaken with their current audience, especially not with the prince's renowned temper. I was actually hoping to get your help on a little something I want to do, he said, making the prince turn back around to face him. A funny thing or an honourable thing, Sir Goody Two-Shoes? The knight smiled. A funny thing in the name of honour. I was hoping a man with 8 daughters might be particularly keen to help. Other than the fact that you love a good mischief. Oh, this is going to be good. I know it already. So, who are we pranking? Not that innocent, Obi. A prank implies something one can recover from. Oberyn opened a dangerous smile. I am liking this better and better. Do tell, old friend. Upon his move to King's Landing to become Master of Ships, Lord Manderley had decided that his eldest son, Willis, would, as his heir, take over the ruling of White Harbour in his stead, with the help and support of his younger brother Wendell. Willa, his youngest granddaughter, came to court with her grandfather, and being of an age and temperament with Arya, the two girls had become fast friends. In little more than a moon, they had already gotten into all sorts of trouble together, and were driving their parents crazy. Lady Winifred had come over from Winterfell with the Stark host, and would stay as Ella's lady. Both she and Rickon were happy that they weren't parted with the new living arrangements. As the northern house that most resembled the south, the Manderleys were the perfect bridge between the two halves of the realm. The other, apparently, was plenty of drink at a feast. The southerners, initially weary of their northern visitors and their increasing presence at court, were now warming up. Littlefinger watched it all from a distance, unhappy. His manipulation of Lysa had given him control over the Vale, though with her paranoia and overprotectiveness, it would take a lot of work to convince her to join a war. A war, it seemed, he had failed to jumpstart. He had plotted it down to every little detail. Used Lysa to eliminate Jon Arryn and secure the Vale. Have her influence her sister to convince Ned Stark to accept becoming Hand of the King. Have Catelyn convince her simpleton husband to trust the Master of Coin. Create a rivalry between Lannisters and Starks. War. It was supposed to be as easy as getting the king drunk. And it had all started so well. Lysa, the foolish girl in love, killed her husband and fled with her weakling son. Ned Stark had accepted the handship, but by that time had already sent Catelyn back to Riverrun, so Littlefinger hadn't had a chance to get the man under his thumb. Not even when she had come to King's Landing was Catelyn able to be of any help. Oh well, even with Ned Stark married to another woman, the former Lady Stark was still the source worth cultivating. The Master of Ships, however, had been a terrible miscalculation. Stannis Baratheon had been Peter's way of simply his love of duty and scorn for the game. He knew the king's brother was involved with Jon Arryn, searching for the bastards, so his departure from the capital was a possibility he had counted for, and even cherished. The plan, however, had been to install someone manageable in his seat on the council. Peter had underestimated how troublesome having Ned Stark as Hand could be. Now, not only was he not in open war with the Lannisters, though that was certain to come, he was actually meddling. He was meddling in the treasury, making Littlefinger have to cut back on the monthly fee he took, and he was also cutting back on several helping hands, enraging all sorts of the city guards and merchants. And now, the cherry upon the cake, he had jumped ahead and spoken directly with Robert about installing the Fat Mermaid as Master of Ships. Not only was the man annoyingly honourable, he was also staunchly loyal to House Stark, immune to any attempt of bribe or manipulation. Peter didn't like wild cards, and in his book, any card he couldn't place in his hands or pockets was a wild card. Jon Arryn had been gullible, and Stannis was predictable in his inability to be of use. But neither was dangerous to Peter's plan. Ned Stark was dangerous and unpredictable and a fucking honourable northern fool. Peter Baelish didn't like dangers he couldn't control. Something needed to be done about Ned Stark's meddling, and soon. So, now it begins, Arthur said, unsheathing his sword. No, Ned contradicted, raising his own blade. Now it ends. And then the swords began their song. 7 Northerners against 3 Knights of the King's Guard. The blistering dawnish sun was rising in the sky and starting to flood the sky with its light. 1 Northerner fell, and then a second, then Sir Oswell. A 3rd Northerner, a 4th, and a 5th took Sir Gerald with him. Arthur managed to disarm Ned, but the 6th Northerner, whom he had thought was fallen as well, threw himself on his back, making him lose his balance. Ned regained his feet, reached for a sword, and in a whirl of movement, Arthur was the one disarmed and on his back. Then came the cry from inside the tower, a cry of pure agony and filled with anguish. Ned looked in that direction, recognizing his sister's voice. Lyanna. He had found her. Finally, after everything, he had found her. He stepped in that direction, ignoring the King's Guard until Arthur reached a hand and tripped him. Ned looked at him incredulous. You're disarmed, Sir Arthur. I have no intention of killing you. Just let me get to my sister. You won't harm, he coughed out the blood in his mouth. You have my word, I shall harm no one in this tower so long as I can get to my sister. Arthur looked hard at the man. Ned Stark had the upper hand. He had a sword, and even another man at his back, while Arthur was on his knees in the dirt, bloodied, weaponless, and alone. and yet the man made no attempt to hurt him once it was clear he could reach his sister. This was not a man seeking violence. It was a brother seeking a beloved sister. A sentiment he understood all too well. He nodded and Ned ran inside. Arthur flopped to the ground on his back, his heart sinking with a heavy weight of failure. He had been tasked to protect his princess and the royal child she carried. Rhaegar's last heir now. Rhaegar's last command. And he had failed. He had failed his prince and his duty. Now Ned Stark would take his sister back, and Robert Baratheon would get his ultimate revenge on the Dragon Prince. Murder his babe. A child the man had anxiously expected and loved. And like that extinguish his line. He won't, you know, Howland said, leaning heavily on a rock. What? Arthur asked, sitting up. Believe it or not, sir, but we Crannog men have green dreams. I know what, or better who, is waiting in that tower. Who you're here to protect. Think what you will of Lord Stark, but they have words they carry more seriously than their motto. The pack survives, they say. Whatever else happens, oaths, promises, even above honour, the pack survives. That boy is part of the pack. A boy? Arthur asked with a smile. When he and his brothers had left the tower to make a stand, Lyanna had been in labour. Your prince spoke of the prophecies and a great war to end all wars. I don't have the gift of prophecy, but I see great things in that boy's future. He'll be both the best and worst of his parents, but there's greatness in his path. Arthur wasn't sure if he believed in prophecies and fate. I don't know if I like the idea of a man not having freedom to choose his path and his honour. Howland smiled. We all have choices, Sir Arthur. If one chooses a path at a fork in the road, he'll go down that path. The gods sent you the paths, but you must choose the path you want to walk down. We all must. He looked at the tower. You have to make your choice now, Sir Arthur Dane of the Kingsguard. If you go to King's Landing, you will be exiled, or more likely, killed for your part in the princess's alleged kidnapping. Who will protect that boy when he's old enough to need that protection then? Isla was sitting quietly in the empty parlour, sewing. The children had gone riding, and Lyanna was taking a nap. So the tower was uncharacteristically silent. Too silent, in her opinion. She was sewing Benjamin's latest idea for their sigil when she heard footsteps. I beg your pardon, my lady. I didn't mean to disturb you. She smiled. Not at all, my lord. I'm just sewing the quiet away. An old habit, if I recall, he said, crossing to the window. Being here made him remember too much, and worry too much. As is your window gazing. Adam chuckled. 17 years and a lifetime later. And again, here we are in a tower, sewing and window gazing. They smiled and stayed companionable silence for a while. My sister told me the lady couldn't have chosen a better woman to raise her son. Isla smiled. I did what I could. Is it true? About the trout? Yes. She saw the man's jaw and fists clenched. Ella told me what Catelyn Tully prayed for. But what did she do? Nothing that deserves her inhabiting our thoughts any longer, was all she said, aware that the man's sense of justice would cause a problem they were already over and done with, not to mention his guilt at not being there. Arthur was smart enough to know that whatever Catelyn Tully had done, it was bad enough that Ned Stark had reached his limits and sent her away. And both his sister and Isla diverting the subject only made him sure that it was something he'd yell and curse the woman for. He had no more time to question, though, as Benjen came into the room. Adam, my lady wife, he greeted. I wondered if we could talk, Isla. I'll leave you, Adam said, crossing the door. He then turned back to the other man. I hope you know how to behave towards your wife, Lord Stark. She's been through enough. I know, Benjen said, offended. She doesn't need to fear anything from me. Good. I do hope I don't have to put my sword to use to defend the lady's honour and safety, Adam replied. Then his voice lost the warning tone and became threatening. I would hate to make it into a habit to drive swords into a husband's guts. Benjen turned to his wife as the other man left the room. What sort of dishonourable foolishness had her former husband done that he'd gotten himself killed by Arthur Dane? Isla sighed, setting her sewing aside. Now there would be no putting it off. Benjen pulled up a chair and sat in front of her, but didn't rush her into talking. As you've deduced, she started after a moment, Dirk wasn't the kind of man to allow his wife to work in a nobleman's castle. I told him I'd go, but he said no, and thought I would sit meekly by. He was a fool then. You are not meek, Benjen said. She smiled weakly. So I went and spent a week there, before I got a half-day leave to go into town. He was furious, of course, that I had both defied him and left, and that he was alone with his cup and his dying father. That was the first time he was violent. I managed to get away, and I ran back to the tower. I was hoping to get down to the kitchens unseen, and there was no one to care about the bruised face of the scullery maid. As it was, however, the lady had taken Winter out for a ride, and Adam was with her, and they both came across me on the road up to the tower. I bet it wasn't a pretty sight. A kitchen maid with a bruised face and a torn dress. The lady dismounted and came to me and offered help. She smiled. You know how tenacious she was. She insisted and insisted, and then the two of them led me to the kitchen courtyard, telling the servants to call for the maester and make sure I was well taken care of. On the next morning, the butler came and told me the lady had demanded that I be promoted to her personal maid. And for a few moons all was well. Then my friend came up from the village and told me my good father had died, and that they would have a funeral that afternoon. I couldn't not go, and though the lady insisted I take a guard, I refused. No one in the village knew who the nobleman in the tower best was. Best to leave it that way. Dirk wasn't violent, not at first. But then, when night fell and he drank again, I had to smash a vase against his head to run away. A moon later, I discovered I was pregnant, and the lady forbade me to go back. Isla sighed. This was a painful part of the story. Benjen saw how disturbed she was, and entwined their fingers, trying to give her strength. Isla held onto his fingers as if he was what was keeping her grounded in the here and now, rather than lost in the excruciating pain of her memories. We were paid not to say who was in the tower, but no one was paid not to gossip about the servants. Somehow, the story of my pregnancy got down to the village, and Dirk, filled with drink, came to take home his wife and child. I didn't want to go, and the lady had already said I could stay, and then go with them when they returned home. Dirk wasn't happy with that decision and tried to drag me out by force. The commotion was so big the knights came to see what was happening. By that time the lady was pregnant too, of course, and they were worried that it was a threat. I managed to push him away from me, and in retaliation he kicked me back, and I fell belly first on the ground. He kicked me once, before Adam was there pushing him away. I was in too much pain by then. I'd gone into labor. But later they told me Adam warned Dirk 3 times to go and never return. This stupid man decided to mock him and threaten him, saying he would return with his crossbow, and if I didn't go with him, he would kill me, my mistress, and everyone in the tower. It was an empty threat. He would never be able to. But then he threatened the lady, her child, and mocked me. All the while the other maids came to carry me inside, blood dripping down my thighs. Adam gutted him right there, and most rightly so. The maester managed to bring Raya out of me, but she was too small, born too early. She held on for 3 moons, the fierce little thing. And then she was gone too weak to fight the same fever that took the maester. I went down to the village, took a few personal things from the house, and gave it to my friend, whose sons already manage the cheese farm. And then I went back to the tower, and left with Lord Stark, the little lord in my arms. She was crying then, and Benjen could only hold her tightly in his arms, letting her exercise the sadness away, his own heart pulsing painfully. Jon groaned as they hit the floor again. Terrible, Adam said. They were in Arya's dancing room once more, sparring. But this time Jon was losing terribly indeed. I don't think today is a good day, he said, standing back up. I see, Adam said and snorted. So, when you're in the middle of a war and your enemy is closing in, will you just raise a white flag and ask kindly, can we postpone for today? I'm not feeling like it today. Jon blushed. Of course not. Good. That would make you the laughingstock of the realm. A dead laughingstock, mind you. Whatever troubles your mind, you have to put it aside when you pick up your sword. Otherwise you'll end up dead in a ditch. I know. Do you want to talk about it? Jon bit his lip nervously. I don't... He exhaled. I'm just worried. Lyanna or Daenerys? Both. But Lea is safe. She is with Sansa and Arya and Marjorie inside the tower. That means Daenerys is outside right now? What is she doing? Adam asked worriedly. This is probably the most dangerous place in the world for her. I tried telling her that, but she wouldn't listen. Adam snorted. Well, stubbornness is part of the blood of the dragon. She's just like her brother. Jon smiled. Aye, she is stubborn. She said she wanted to go to Fleabottom. I tried to convince her to at least let me go with her, but she wouldn't have it. Why? Because she's stubborn and strong-willed, Jon muttered bad-humouredly, sighing when he saw the old man's raised eyebrow. She wanted to do something other than be an idle lady. As well she should. I agree. But she has this crazy idea of starting a cooking school to train cooks in exotic saucy spices and recipes. People would never hire foreign cooks, Adam pointed out, putting his sword away leaning against the table. I know, which is why I told her I couldn't let her sink so much time and money into it. She wasn't pleased, not in the least. Anyway, after a huge argument, I managed to convince her that I don't actually think she is incapable. Just that the idea wasn't the best. We're already thinking of organising the growing of the village, so I asked her if she'd like to undertake that, making sure the village grew orderly and controlled in order to avoid this foul smell we have here. Now that we are here, she's decided she'll go and investigate the way the houses are built to see better what shouldn't be allowing. She is passionate about her projects. I do hope you've sent guards with her, though. Of course I did. RileyRoxx wouldn't have it any other way, too. That's a loyal man. Adam smiled. He was very relieved Jon and Daenerys had such reliable security in place. He is, but sometimes no matter the amount of guards one has. Adam took a deep breath. You couldn't have stopped that spectacle in court. No one could. And as a matter of fact, it was better that it was public, because everyone saw what you needed them to see, that Daenerys is not a threat to Robert Baratheon. I suppose. Jon shrugged. Then looked down at his boots. But what if the king suddenly decides she is? He will call for her head, Adam said simply, and you will have 2 choices. Obey your king, or rise in rebellion. But if she doesn't do anything? If he calls for her head, then it doesn't matter if it's justified or not. You either deliver, or you're a rebel. Then he will have to fight his way to get to her, Jon said resolutely and without hesitation. Adam smiled proudly. You better put that sword to good use then, boy. Come on, clear your head and charge. Anger means a sword through your belly, and a clear head means your sword through the enemy's. Jon chuckled, picking up the practice sword and taking up his position. This time both he and Adam were panting when the match ended in a tie. Better, the knight said. Daenerys was flabbergasted with what she saw around her. Though Jon had also been furious, she had insisted that she come alone. Well, as alone as could be, with 5 guards at her back. Ella had helped her put on a brunette wig, as her silver hair would be much too much of a giveaway, and she didn't want to risk meeting anyone holding a grudge against the Mad King, or having Robert Baratheon accusing her of incensing the small folk. She had been initially furious when Jon had shut down her plan for the cooking school, and had been livid when he brought up the idea of urbanizing the village and the town. So she couldn't invest in her idea, but rather had to deal with sewers and the like. It had been a huge fight, the biggest they'd ever had, and Jon had even had the large sofa in his solar made up into a makeshift bed because they were both furious with the other. They had avoided each other for 2 days until Isla had had enough, had dragged them both by their ears into their chambers, locked them inside, and said they could come out only when they had resumed behaving like adults and not spoiled children. After a good 2 hours of glowering in different directions, Jon had given up and tried to talk, and she had decided to listen, and then, finally, they managed to listen to each other's reasons. Daenerys understood the logic behind the decision to not follow the cooking school plan, and Jon understood why Dany had been so angry in the first place. In the end, Daenerys started plotting out the best way to organise the village, after she and Jon spent the night making up for it in their bed. But this morning she had insisted to see King's Landing and all the examples of what not to do. Chamber pots being emptied into the streets, pigs, horses, even cows running freely and leaving their excrements all around. Houses so close together the wind had no space to go around them to make the air circulate. Well, she had good and nice ideas to talk with their builder once she returned. Then a group of children ran through the dark and narrow streets, laughing and screaming, looking for the next bit of fun to be had. One of them nearly ran into her, apologised hastily, and ran after his friends. She was watching them when a woman approached, bringing a load of laundry resting on her hip. "Any of them troubling you, milady?" she asked. Daenerys ordered Orys to stand down. No, I'm just watching. I'm sorry, milady. We have no room for them to run inside, so they take to the streets and bothering people." "They weren't a bother," Dany insisted, remembering running through the courtyards or the godswood of Winterfell growing up. The woman nodded, curtsied, and hitched the laundry onto her hip, going back on her way. Dany smiled as she watched the children go. They had crowded into an empty corner and were loudly pretending to be knights, swatting with wooden sticks at each other, the girls cheering them on. "Milady, can we go?" Orys asked, anxiously looking around. Yes, let's return to the tower. I've seen what I needed to see." She would make room for a park in the village, where the children could gather and play. Like this. They wouldn't be in anyone's way, and would have more than enough room to let their imaginations run wild. End of chapter. Hi guys, hope you enjoyed that one. I like Arthur's advice to Jon. Dany's project, they needed that argument, I think. All couples need it. And of course, Isla's backstory. I mean, give the poor lady a cuddle. No one deserves that. And her husband, well, I'm not crying over Dirk. Anyway, you guys know the drill. Like, comment and subscribe and hit that bell to get notified for whenever I upload a new video. Have a good day, night, or whatever time zone you're in. Bye my guys, gals, and my binary pals. I'll see you in another video. Take care.